Kia ora te whānau. Today this episode is going to focus on the transport that we use on the farm. So probably about 6 years ago we started using electric bikes, and it's actually really hard to look back and think how we used to do things. So for whoever's not actually been on a farm, you'll know there's a certain distance between our garden, our nursery and our house. In total about maybe a K and a half. And when you're operating a farm like we do that sort of requires going back and forward, you realize that walking is quite a large part of your day's job. So we've since having these electric bikes, that amount of time between checking the animals, feeding the goats, feeding the chickens, going to get stuff, something you've forgotten in a job, it's just really cut that down to basically nothing. And that's all thanks to these electric bikes. So we've got a little bit of hills on our property, nothing major, but what you can actually do with an electric bike versus a push bike, which might still be enough to get around, what you can actually get on the back of them, and the weight that you can move around, and the fact that you don't even think about doing a trip back and forward is really incredible. So anybody who has a property that has any kind of travel time between point A and point B, zone 1, zone 5, whatever, it's really amazing piece of technology, and quite low maintenance. We find them to be something I have to fix maybe twice a year, sort of minor things like brakes, chains. But we've got here 3 electric bikes and 2 trailers, so I'll talk about them as I go through. And so broadly speaking, electric bikes have 2 divisions. You've got mid-drives and hub drives. So anybody who's wanting to invest in an electric bike for a farm, there's a few little things I'm going to point out that I found to be pretty much something that you can't get around. That's really important. So here in the first bike is the cheapest bike that we've got, and it's what's called a hub drive. So there's 2 types of hub drives. There's a rear hub and a front hub, and if you're doing anything on a farm with a bit of mud, rear hub's really the only way to go. Otherwise you'll just constantly find that you're slipping. So what a hub drive basically means is that you have the propulsion in the wheel rather than somewhere else like you have in the mid-drive. So here we have this very fat hub in the middle of the back wheel, and that's where you have a geared motor that basically drives the wheel forward. So it doesn't go through the chain, so it's quite a separate thing. So when you're pedaling, the motor has its set speed and it just goes at that speed no matter what you're doing with your pedals and no matter what gear you're in. So that's a really big differentiation that I'll go into more with the mid-drives. A big issue with them is they're incredibly heavy in the back, but they're pretty maintenance free and they don't wear down your chain, so that's pretty awesome. This bike we got for 300, and it was something that someone had bought and found that they were working, and I found that the only thing was wrong was the battery not working, and they didn't realize that. And so I took an old battery from a previous bike and mounted it on the back Mad Max style, and then just rerouted the cable to the bike instead of buying a new battery. So this bike, the advantages that it has over the other bikes is actually the step-through frame. So you'll find that actually, if you're taking the loads around that like we do, is really useful. So instead of having to swing your leg over the back, it makes a huge difference on your day-to-day getting in, off and on your bike. So we'll leave that for now and move on to the next bike. So this here is an mountain bike that someone installed their own system. So most bikes that people have that they modified come from flung. That's it's a Chinese brand, and you can buy them on AliExpress or Amazon. And to basically put the entire system, including cut-off brakes, mid-drive motor and battery, you're looking at about $1,000. So you can take any old bike that you have and put your own system in. That's pretty standard. Within that you've got different power. So this one's a 300 watt. We used to have a 250 watt, which is the legal limit in New Zealand for the road. So if you want to use a bike on the road, you're not legally allowed to have a motor stronger than 250 watts. And for us, that's just a little bit underpowered, so we find that a little bit tedious. So to get into mid-drives, so this here and the next bike are both mid-drives. This bike's a self-made one, and what you basically have with a mid-drive is you have the entire power of the motor going over your gear system. So there's a good thing about that and also a bad thing. So the good thing to start with is anytime you're shifting gears, you're actually making the job easier for your motor. So if you're going up a hill, you can go to first gear, and that means all the normal power that your motor has is suddenly multiplied into your gear ratio, just as if you're pedaling up the hill as well. That same holds true if you're going on a flat piece of road and you suddenly want to go faster. You shift up into 7th gear, and that means that your motor is suddenly able to give you a lot more speed with the same rotational power that it had originally. The downside is that you are using a lot more of your chain and your sprocket system. So if you're using your bike a lot, like we are obviously on gravel roads and things like that, you'll find that you wear through your chain a lot faster. We haven't actually changed our chain more than maybe once every 4 years, and that's because we're really pushing it. Some bike enthusiasts will actually change that probably every year or twice a year. But for us, just working it as a farm vehicle, we found that's fine. And sometimes the gears don't work perfectly, and we're also totally okay with that. Okay, on to another little element which we have across all these 3 bikes is a throttle acceleration system. So this here you can see is similar to a motorbike. The only difference that half the handlebar spins and not the entire handlebar. So that's quite an important feature if you're doing anything on the farm. So we obviously have the pannier systems, but you'll often have something in your hand that's too long to go in the back. Maybe a shovel that you're taking down to the garden, or maybe the extra bucket that you're holding, whatever. And if you have a full throttle system, you'll often accidentally give yourself a bit of a fright as you're trying to steer that you over throttle. So having that half is pretty great. You can also find throttle systems that have a little thumb lever, and I think they work okay, but they're a little bit more tweaky, so they're harder to adjust properly. It is a little bit tricky to find throttled electric bikes. A lot of them are just what's called pedal assist, and they can be okay, but it's really quite important to have, I think, a throttle system, because sometimes the way that we load our bikes up, and I'll throw some images up about that, we have so much on the back that it's actually quite hard to start kicking to get your bike moving, and it's quite nice to have the throttle system that just takes you off and you don't have to worry about that whole takeoff moment. So I really recommend throttles on your bikes. Beyond that, our bikes all have disc brakes, and I think I probably would say that it's not feasible to have a normal rim brake system on an electric bike, because the weight, especially once we add trailers on it, it's just too much and it would overload it. We have swapped out one of our brakes with a hydraulic brake on this bike, and our next bike actually has a full hydraulic system. All bikes have a cutoff system, so when you pull the brakes it actually switches off your motor, and that's pretty handy when you're moving around in sort of little delicate places over mud and you don't want to accidentally take off. So we'll come to our 3rd bike here, and that's our most expensive bike. So we've got this bike off a company called Buzz Bikes, and they've been really good to deal with, and we found this bike, which we've dubbed Black Beauty, to be really great. Like, it's a really overpowered bike almost, but it's really amazing to get around long distance places over mud with these big fat wheels. We got a free back tire from someone who came to our course, Teva Chonan, and that's made a huge difference in terms of getting around the place. But this bike is 1,000 watts, so where the other bike was 300 watts, with 1,000. Having said that, it's also quite a bit heavier, and so a lot of that power does get eaten up in just motivating that mass to go. But it's still, you definitely notice a huge increase to this. So anybody who's looked at the Upco bikes, which are getting quite a lot of fame now, I think Pizza Hut's using them, they actually also only have 1,000 watts in total, but they have it across 2 different wheels as hub motors. So this bike here is, the only downside that I find is that it's quite high up. So whoever designed it made a normal size bike, and I think didn't compensate for the fact that it's getting raised another 3 inches by the time the wheels are inflated. So that's the one side. So when you're getting on and off, it does feel this is as low as a seat can go, and I'm not a particularly short person, and that's quite a challenge. Having the problem also of needing to swing your leg over the back is a bit of a problem when we have these panniers, and we also usually have a large load of branches on the back as well. Here you can see that the mid-drive motor is integrated into the body of the bike, and the same with the battery. So it's something that is really nice, it looks really neat, but it is a challenge if you ever burn out a motor or you need to replace a battery. It means you have to buy the exact same model, and that could be a lot more expensive than something else that you find. So whereas that first mid-drive motor that we looked at, that's something that you buy and add to an existing standard bike. This motor here and this battery here are specifically for this frame. So that's something to bear in mind if you ever need to replace parts later on. This bike came with a small set of disc brakes, 150 millimeters I think, and we always found that was a little bit underpowered, and so I've replaced them since then with 180 millimeter, and that stopping power is really important on something so heavy as this. This is probably close to 50 kgs maybe, so it's definitely something that has a lot of momentum once it's going, and you really want to have that stopping power. Okay, onto the custom parts that I've made. So you'll have noticed all our pannier systems. These are basically drums that used to have things like fertilizer or sprays in them, and you can get them really easily from most farms. And what I did is just cut the top off and mounted these little hooks, so they're bent bits of metal, just screwed on the back. And later on I realized that it's really nice to have a handle, so as you're carrying the buckets on and off, we used to just have to hold the hooks like this, and it's actually been really nice to have a handle. So what we have for every one of our bikes is we probably have about 20 of these kicking around the farm. Sometimes they have things in them for a while and they get moved around. Sometimes we just put stuff straight in there, like rubbish or branches or harvesting from the garden, and they just clip right onto the back of the panniers, the carriers, and that's been really easy. That's something so low tech but so appropriate to what we do. And what's really lovely is that you actually find that buckets can fit right in there as well, so it's really helpful. The other thing that you might have noticed is that all our bikes have an inner tube tied to the back of the pannier, including the valve and everything. So it's literally just a bike inner tube, and what we do with that is it allows us to just strap a bunch of branches on the back. So whenever we go harvest in the garden, we get a bunch of bamboo. If you're coming down from the food forest, we're bringing down Teutonia, and we just scrape it on there and then strap it over the seat, and that's it. That's how we get around the farm, and it makes getting fodder for the goats and harvesting any kind of wood for any part of the farm that's needed such a breeze. But here you see the problem that I mentioned with the white bike. So if I'm now trying to get over here, it's really where it starts getting a little bit of a stretch, and I would really love if we had a bit of a step through frame. I don't think it would be much of a compromise structurally, but it would be a huge relief on your back getting on and off a bike. But we'll leave the bikes now and I'll move on to the trailers. So what we have here is a trailer from Kiwi Trailers. It's an online company, and this was the first trailer that we got from them, and it's an entire aluminium frame that I modified with a few little parts so we could put the standardized bucket on there, which we got from Bunnings. So this frame here is what we got from Kiwi Trailers. They have this customized, the company is called cycletrailers.co.nz, and you have a system that you just slip a little tube back and it latches onto a little nipple that you mount on the back of a bike. Well, I'll do a close-up on that later, and you can put that on any bike, and it just sits on the axle bolt where the back wheel goes. And this curve here allows you to do really tight turns with the bike, and it's a really quick release on and off. The only thing that I've noticed is that they do wear out after a while, and admittedly we do give our trailers a hell of a beating. They probably go up and down our road maybe 5 or 6 times a day, and they rattle back and forward, and what happens is after a while the little trailer hitch attachment does start getting worn out, and we do find occasionally that we lose a trailer, especially if what we've done is weighted a lot of our load towards the back of the trailer, so it's lifting off. So that's something to bear in mind, and I would like eventually either to see cycle trailers update that design to be more resilient. The last trailer is one that you might have seen me fiddling around with on Country Calendar, and so this is one that I made myself. So I have bought the arm and the attachment from Cycle Trailers New Zealand as well, and then I've just mounted it onto a custom-made plywood trailer. So what we found that we needed was a larger trailer that we could put in a few crates for apples when we do harvesting of all our fruit, our pumpkins and so on. And so we needed a wider area, and we wanted something that was sort of had its own suspension. We found that little trailer bounces around quite a bit, and that could also be partly because of the smaller wheels. So the wheels are upgraded with normal bicycle wheels, and then I made a big plywood frame. So here you can see that the wheels are mounted on little bits of aluminium L bracket, just really simple materials that you can find in Bunnings or Ulrich aluminium. And then I've made a bottom out of 9mm ply, and found that actually having that gives it a natural flexing, so it's almost like having a sprung trailer, and it's worked quite well. So really low tech, really simple, hinging back. So it means that we can unload a little bit of compost. It's not something that you can take very heavy loads, because one issue is the trailer hitch that can be a little bit temperamental sometimes. So I would like to find a longer term solution for that one. Another one is just going up and down hills, sometimes a little bit challenging. But on most of our trips between the nursery and the garden, which is flat, but a longer distance that you don't want to take a wheelbarrow, this has been really great, and it's worked so well for us. And what we then have also is a few elastic bands that we can strap across the trailer when we're taking anything like branches around the place. So yeah, that's basically the introduction of all our electric bikes and our 2 trailers. We are looking at some point to expand to a 3-wheeler possibly, which is a really cool New Zealand design. But at the moment this is actually helping us get around, and it's solving all our logistical issues with distances. And at the moment our cost upkeep in them is pretty ridiculously low. I've replaced the odd chain here, the odd sprocket, but we haven't replaced any batteries apart from one from the second bike that I introduced. And we've also found that since buying batteries, actually you can make your own batteries or repack them, and that can reduce the cost of a new battery, which is normally about $900 down to about $250. So it's definitely worth considering, and you find lots of videos on YouTube how to do that with a variety of different methods, some of them involving screwing batteries together that are specifically for screwing together, or some where you need to buy a spot welder and you weld your own packages. But you can also find new batteries on AliExpress for about the same price. So the only advantage to making your own batteries, if that's something you're interested in, is that you can be more certain about the quality of your battery. So you get them from somewhere like Lifegood instead of AliExpress, which does require a certain word of mouth security. So if you've heard of someone buying a good battery to replace your electric bike, it's worth going with the same supplier, because I have heard some batteries being packed with sand, for example, so half the pack's got sand in them, which is a bit of a worry if you end up spending $300. Having said that, AliExpress has a really great refund policy, so it's not such a risk. So if you are interested in getting into your own electric bikes, I would recommend making your own. It's something that allows you to have some autonomy and know where to source external parts, so you're not sort of reliant on someone else doing it. If you have no expertise with that, obviously go with a nearby electric bike shop, but we found that they are incredibly interchangeable, the parts. So if you have some battery from an X bike, you can actually chuck it on a new bike as long as it's 36 volts and it'll go. You might have to modify the attachment parts, but it all works really easily. And it's also really worthwhile looking for a good bike if you're going to put a motor on it, rather than some crappy old bike, because by the time you've gone to all the trouble of modifying parts to fit a bike, you do really want to have a bike that's going to last and be reliable. So yeah, if you have any questions about that or an experience with your own bikes, feel free to flick them on the comment. Cheers!